you, and good morning to those of you who will see this recording here on the Community News Network. We always want to thank Grant Miller for providing this opportunity to our community, those of us who are willing and want to give an outreach to our community all across South Florida, and his service and the Community News Network over the course of the years here. That's really been a great way for people to stay in touch with each other and get great information across the board. Willard Shepard, long time at NBC6 here in South Florida, and now running my law and consulting firm, Willard Shepard Law and Media here in South Florida. And one of the things we focus on, of course, one of my great loves from being an Air Force fighter pilot, always thanking the taxpayers for that education, is aviation and keeping people safe while you go to fly. And today I've got one of my number one colleagues and buddies and brothers when it comes to explaining to the public things that are going on to calm them when we have circumstances that develop that are alarming to the public. And that's my good friend, Mr. Jay Rollins, former Navy pilot, retired American Airlines captain, FAA instructor as well. And Jay provides great insight across the board, many times helping us over at NBC when we had aviation issues. And now we're very fortunate to be able to have him on the platform today here as well. And we want to also thank him for his service and his son, who is now a Navy pilot as well, out there in places many times that we can't say about what we're very proud of him and what he's up to right now. To matters at hand that brings us together today, big picture and the great news for especially South Florida, data showing about 2.5 million passengers a day. Record numbers will be flying during March and April during the spring break seasons. Where is one of the number one places they want to come? Right here to South Florida, to come here and do that. So we expect incredible numbers at the airport. You can see in the background that Grant has set up here all of the things that have been done. And that graphic we're going to get to in just a bit, concerning what happened up at Boston, Massachusetts, and what we call a near miss or a runway incursion, specifically in our flight technical terms, during the course of the day. This happened on Monday, but it is the fifth incident in the United States that the FAA is looking into in terms of airplanes almost colliding with each other when it comes to a runway incursion, something on the ground. And last year, during the entire year, in terms of potential serious collisions, there were only 12. So we've basically gone a very short time during the year and see an increase in this. First of all, okay, a lot of setup for you there. And we have this diagram of the Boston Logan International Airport. If people have flown in there, this is basically an airport that's out in the water. And you see these crossing runways that are set up out there, and that can, I'll just say in lay terms, lead to trouble. And we had that on Monday. So Jay, with that, I'll give you the floor. Just tell people, obviously, the passengers on airplanes, they just want to get from point A to point B and safely do that. People on a Southwest Airlines flight here almost came to land but had to go around and had some nervous moments during those time periods. So tell us what happened on Monday, and then we'll backtrack as to what the circumstances are in some of these early events as well.
Yes, this is one of the more hazardous parts of the flight. Everybody knows takeoff and landing, but also taxiing around. There have been a number of incidents, not just runway incursions, but also where tip to tip, they've been pushing one airplane, the other airplane comes around and their tip of their wing ends up hitting the aircraft under tow. There's lots of possibilities when it comes to runway incursions. If you look at that chart of Boston International, it's a good example of where there's lots of crisscross runways. And because of that, you have chances for intersecting takeoffs and landings. And whenever that happens, it gets kind of complicated. In this particular case, if you look at that chart, you will see on the left, this is, by the way, a chart that a pilot is looking at as they're actually taxiing out. And so, or in. If you look on the left side, you can see the terminals over there, those black buildings, like you're looking like a bird would be looking down on the airport. So on the left side would be the terminal section. That's where that aircraft, the business jet, was taxiing out of that area towards the runway that runs left to right. That one, I believe, is runway 8.
09.
Zero 09. Okay, they're based on the compass. So basically, that's an eastbound runway. You're looking at that chart, and to the north, it would be up. So to the right is to the east. And that aircraft was coming out of that terminal area, coming down to that to the south and towards that runway that heads off to the east, runway 9. And at the same time, there was a Delta aircraft arriving. Southwest, excuse me. Southwest Airlines approaching from the south, landing to the north. If you look at that chart, you see 2 long runways that are oriented basically north and south, slightly to the east. The one on the right, the longer one, is for right. And so this Southwest flight was approaching for landing, and landing traffic always has priority over traffic that's taking off. So in this case, the landing traffic, the Southwest had permission to land on that runway 04 right, and the business jet was pulling on to 9 left. They gave him instructions, or her, gave the captain instructions to line up and wait. That's something that they tell people when they want you to pull out to the runway, but don't take off. Just get into position.
As I was telling you before, we don't want to go too far down into the weeds and the details for our non-aviators, which is the biggest portion of our audience today. But that just simply means like you would come up to a stop sign.
Yes.
And stop and wait.
Or a yield.
Yes. My issue with that is, and I tell you, I'm not a fan of lining up and waiting, because why? You're already sitting on the runway, okay?
Yes.
And when you're sitting on the runway, what are the chances of a runway incursion? They simply go up because of where you are. I'm a fan of simply, unless you're cleared to take off, you don't get on the runway, period. Now, I know in the commercial airline business, they're trying to expedite the traffic, move it as fast as possible, but this is a perfect example of why line up and wait is not a good idea, because this is what we had that you're going to go ahead and describe what this pilot did that almost caused this disaster.
It can happen the other way too, where you've been cleared to line up and wait, and you're sitting there and another aircraft is landing on your same runway. You have to be listening, that's the thing, to
Yes.
keep up with what's going on. Sometimes there's another aircraft that's headed inbound for your runway, and the tower expects to get you going before they actually arrive. There's actually been nasty accidents where aircraft have landed atop of even smaller planes. It's a pretty bad situation, so your point is well taken.
In this situation, the instruction was given, line up and wait. The information that's been publicly released so far is that the captain of this private aircraft, which is, from the reporting I saw, an aircraft owned by a company here in South Florida and was up there in Boston, that they acknowledged line up and wait, which meant that, hey, they heard that they weren't supposed to go, but for some reason, they started their takeoff roll. And then bring us together where we have these merging of these 2 aircraft that the data showed they were about 550 feet apart. And when you do the math at 125 miles an hour, so you're talking about 2 seconds or so.
Yes, it's a scary situation. If you are actually on that landing aircraft, the Southwest aircraft, you're looking out for this sort of thing, but at the same time, if you don't catch it, this aircraft starts to roll, you could be in a really nasty situation. In this case, I get the impression that that Southwest pilot must have had an inkling that there was trouble, because he was ready. As soon as the air traffic controller realized what was happening, he said, go around to the Southwest airliner. And so he did the immediate action that's necessary, which was immediately to have power, pull the nose up, and start climbing up above that aircraft rolling.
The passengers I saw said that it was obviously alarming to them because they thought they were going to land. I heard one passenger say that they thought they actually touched down shortly, and then, went airborne again.
Okay.
So this is obviously something that we, don't want to have to transpire. As we find out, as technology moves forward and people watching us today and tonight looking and saying, well, wait a second, how could this possibly happen? We have GPS in automobiles that people are, frequently, using all the time, sometimes too much on the ground and reliance too much on the ground. How is this possible? In our air traffic control system, we still have a lot of this that is still reliant upon verbal communication and acknowledgement of that communication, and then following what that acknowledgement is. So most of the times these things have transpired, we're talking about an error that a person makes. So that appears to be what has transpired here. Of course, the NTSB is now involved, and there'll be a litany of things that are actually taken into consideration here. But ultimately, from what we know to this point, it appears that the person actually didn't execute what they told the controller they were going to do. So why? How could this transpire?
That's the worst case scenario too, because generally you didn't get the clearance or you didn't understand the clearance. But here's a situation where the business jet pilot was given the instruction to line up and wait, and yet he acknowledged it, he or she, I haven't heard the actual audio, acknowledged that they were going to line up and wait, but then proceeded to take off. The only explanation that I can tell you is that the cockpit environment, needless to say, on taxi out is a very busy place. And unfortunately, if you have a number of distractions going on in the cockpit, you're not quite ready, or maybe you're in a hurry. It can be all sorts of reasons why a pilot will get off their game like that. And they're not really, people do this at home. You have your mind on 2 or 3 things, and you end up pouring honey into your skillet instead of grease, all kinds of crazy stuff. Well, that's the sort of thing happening here. You have someone who is apparently thinking about something else and just automatically repeating back what they were told, but not really processing that and keeping aware of the situational awareness is that you shouldn't be doing anything else at that moment, that you're in a predicament like that of taking an active runway. It's a wake-up call for all pilots.
We had American Airlines aircraft that was headed to London back earlier this year with a similar runway incursion type incident where the initial information was is they got confused about where they were and crossed an active runway with the same type of situation of a lot of checks and other things being done in the cockpit during that taxi time period. People in the back of the airplane, what are they doing? They're not really paying attention to the flight attendants when they're giving the safety briefing. Many people have already got their iPads and personal devices and everything up and running and are oblivious to all these things that are actually taking place while an airplane is on the ground. And just as a passenger, make an automatic assumption that, oh, we're not even flying yet, so there's nothing dangerous that could possibly happen. Whereas the taxi environment, because of the volume of airplanes that are at our airports, and the increase in traffic, and you really can't expand the airport operation like there in Boston. Right. It's out in the water. You can't. There's no way you can build any new runways. Those types of things. All of those types of things are going on. How do we manage an increase in traffic, keeping people safe, and the proper training to, at some point, you got to stop everything that's going on and a lot of this automation and look outside and listen and hear?
You said a mouthful, because there are a number of things that can be done and actually have been done over the years. The very deadliest airliner crash of history was the Tenerife crash, where two 747s crashed full of people, and most of them died, unfortunately. And that one was basically the same sort of thing. There was one aircraft on the runway, and the other one's trying to take off. And so they're very, very dangerous. It's happened through the years. And in response, they've added more lighting for the runways to let you know that you're in a dangerous zone. There are the wig-wag lights, all sorts of things. But it really, I think people are more focused now on the actual human factor. You touched on it regarding the whole notion that you're going to be managing this thing. If you're not aware and staying conscious as the pilot of the situation and not allowing other distractions to interrupt, this is never going to get fixed. We've got more flights. There's hectic crews that are running from gate to gate to get out the flight. They perhaps in the business world, they are trying to get their clients someplace right away. So all of these pressures add up unless the pilot is able to get a grip on their own situation and pull it back and stay with the moment, not be too far ahead of things. We're on the runway now, so that's all we're waiting for is cleared for takeoff. Without that, you just don't roll.
I'll bring this home to our airport here in South Florida and show a difference between Miami International and Fort Lauderdale, in the sense that at Miami International, on the north side of the ramp, where you have runway 08 and runway 12 there together, if people listening to us and seeing us today think about that, when they get on an airplane, even if they're just casually, looking out the window, generally an airplane will taxi off to the west there to go for runway 08, right generally on the takeoff. And that runway 12 is there while it doesn't cross 08, it's adjacent to it. And the taxi structure kind of brings everybody together there.
Shaped like a V.
Yes, and there's actually on the map a hot spot, what we call a hot spot in the flying business, to alert the captain and the first officer that, hey, you're going into an area where there could be a lot of aircraft on the ground going and coming from different runways. And so the FAA and the chart makers do try to give those of us who fly like heads up. Hey, be on the lookout at this particular place. When you see something like that, and that's an example here at Miami International, what do you do? And people sometimes are looking and going, hey, those guys over there taxied up after us and they're going first, and why aren't we going, and those types of things. Tell me what's going on during that process right there at those bottlenecks like here at MIA.
A lot of times you don't have immediate clearance because your flight is not cleared en route yet. So they're allowing other aircraft to get in front, or maybe you have a problem, you're checking, they pull you off to the side. So as a passenger, you won't know these things, but ultimately the cockpit crew is keeping up with it. In the case you're talking about, those V-type runways, they can be hazardous because it's easy for someone unfamiliar with the airport, a pilot, to take the wrong runway. They think they're on the runway they want to be, but they're actually on another. And so one of the things that I know that went on at our company was to encourage pilots to always, as the last check the compass and make sure that that is the same as the runway that you're using. But this runway arrangement in Miami, the V, where you have that problem that you might line up for the wrong runway, the Boston one has a subtlety going because it's more like an X. And in that case, what can go wrong is that you pull onto the correct runway, it's the only one there, but you don't really pay much attention to the fact that there's a crossing runway well ahead. And so you end up being in a mindset that it's clear out there and we're out here on the runway, so something flips and you're ready to keep going. And meanwhile, there's another aircraft approaching to land on that crossing runway. Which is what
transpired here. Now, let's talk about what the FAA and those who build and construct our airports in our country have tried to do This runway incursion that we call it in technical terms is basically means being on the wrong runway is something that the FAA has had a focus on in studying. For those of us that are instructors and things, there's a lengthy process to go through and emphasis on this area so that this kind of thing that we're talking about now, having occurred 5 times with commercial aircraft where there were near misses so far this year, should not be taking place. This is something that the FAA takes very, very, very seriously, and for good reason. One thing that they've tried to do is construct airports going forward where you don't have these kinds of crossing runways. And this isn't possible. Good thing up near you in your neighborhood at Fort Lauderdale, when the new runway went in on the south part near Griffin Boulevard,
Right.
that is a parallel runway.
Yes.
That's a significant distance from the runway off on the north side. So the runways at Fort Lauderdale are basically facing all east and west without this kind of crossing for any major runway. The airport in Denver that was built a decade ago, all of the runways are runway, in terms of their
Parallel.
orientation, and they're all parallel runways. And that's one of the things that the FAA has tried to do to make sure that it doesn't get to a human error, because it'd be almost impossible for you to end up on the wrong runway because of the distance between the runways and the fact that they're all in, the same direction. I do want you to overall emphasize as well, and this is something I tell people about flying all the time, when this type of thing takes place, of course it makes people nervous.
Yeah.
And our objective today is to give people information to educate themselves, so the next time they go to MIA and the next time they go to Fort Lauderdale or the next time they go to PBI, all places that we love, is that the odds of them being involved in a situation like this are extremely small. And there's a special emphasis on this now. What kind of messages have gone out since Monday in the airline community to make sure this doesn't continue?
Well, you can be assured that this is a number one hot item for all users, really, because even the flight schools, the business jets, the airlines will all take a second look at what their procedures are. They'll remind people. Some of the operations have what they call safety stand downs or special videos. They'll include that in the recurrent training to set up scenarios, even in the simulators. So there are a number of things. Everyone is taking it very seriously because we've been lucky, frankly, that nothing has happened. However, I don't want to unreasonably alarm people either, because in the big scheme of things, with thousands of flights every day, this could happen. And frankly, in my career, I've had several times where I've voluntarily, without even being told, sometimes you're told to go around, and other times I've chosen to go around. I remember going into San Francisco International one time, and there was a KLM airline, a 747, excuse me, it was Korean Air, 747, the tail was sticking on to the runway, and we're approaching and approaching, and he's not moving. And I'm looking at the situation on short final, thinking, well, I could land and just stay right of the center line and everything will be fine. But my thoughts at the moment were, no, why should I take that chance? He's not supposed to be there. I don't need to take this onto myself at all. I executed my own go-around. But just to be alert for that sort of thing, I think that the public need not worry excessively. It's one of many hazards out there that are managed daily, and still it's the safest form of transportation.
I always say a lot safer than being on our highways here in South Florida.
Yes.
Not even close. And math, unfortunately, shows that to be the case. Okay, to ground safety and security in the few minutes we have left, do need to give kudos to our TSA officers and workers. There was a person that showed up at an airport in Pennsylvania that was headed to Orlando, had explosives
Yes.
in their luggage concealed in their luggage. This person checked them through, not try to go through the checkpoint, but check baggage, and they were discovered. An announcement was made at the airport for this person to come and, retrieve their luggage, and the security video shows that the person took off.
Sneaked out.
Yes, and the police ultimately tracked him down, and now this person is facing a whole litany of federal charges, as they should. Talk to us about the ability, especially since 9/11, that the TSA on the ground has done, both with the checkpoints and what goes on behind the scenes, to make sure that this type of thing can't get on an airplane.
I think the kudos are definitely in order for TSA for catching this. It always kind of concerned me about carry-ons and about cargo, but they're apparently on top of that. This thing was detected. There's still evil people that will attempt to do things like this, and I have to say TSA has done an excellent job, because if you think about it, it's been like 20 years, and we haven't had any further foolishness the way we did on 9/11. So that's where I would say, and I think that it's well worth taking a breather, that they're doing their jobs. Sometimes it's inconvenient. I know, taking off your shoes and the whole bit, and we don't understand why sometimes you got the 3-ounce thing that they'll enforce. There's all sorts of things, but they're keeping up with all sorts of things that we may not be privy to, but at the same time, it's worth it. It's worth it to slow down and go ahead and let them check sufficiently.
Okay, and again, what they detected was out of sight after your bags go away on the conveyor belt. We want the public to know that those TSA agents or officers are doing their diligence to the best of their ability.
Absolutely.
At all of our airports. And unfortunately, the latest numbers I got from Fort Lauderdale were that, the number of people attempting to bring weapons through, many times accidentally at the airport, at our airports here in Florida, not just at Fort Lauderdale, was up in record numbers in 2022, and there have already been incidents there during the course of 2023, and that can't make a mistake, got to always be diligent on the lookout, and those officers are doing that. Mr. Rollins, Captain Rollins, always great to be with you.
Yes, sir.
Again, kudos to your son for his service out there in the United States Navy in faraway places right now. We won't hold it against you two naval aviators. I meant to say at the beginning today, while I'm casually dressed, I have on my Tuskegee Airmen World War II shirt,
That's
the
cool.
red tails. Always want to honor the men that made it possible for us
That's
to
right.
go and fly airplanes in the military and beyond. And there are about 10 of the original Tuskegee Airmen fighter pilots that are still physically with us. And we always appreciate and honor them in the way they not only changed aviation, but our country. And we're much in great gratitude to them. As we are, Mr. Miller and his entire operation here during the course of the day today. Mr. Pena over there on the board controlling this operation throughout the course of this afternoon. We appreciate it very much, all his work here at Community News Network. They're always here for you, and this is your community, and we're bringing it to you. And hopefully our conversation will allay some of the fears that you may have out there if you're taking a flight soon and you see these types of things on the news and you wonder, what in the heck is going on? This overall is a very safe system, but there are humans that are involved in it, and every now and then, as we know, people make mistakes. We've all made them. And therefore, that's what has transpired here. There are just some situations where obviously a mistake can't be made and can't be tolerated.
Yeah.
And we have to do everything possible to make sure the training is in place and the focus is there so we don't see these types of mistakes. Okay, God bless. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon here on the